where the unipolar system is gradually fading and the multipolar system is coming in, it is imperative to look at how the global world can benefit from the advantages of multilateralism, especially Africa, which has become a focal point in today's world. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's another edition of the program Global Insight on For You Media Africa, and today we want to look at the place of Africa in a multipolar world, and also looking at how the Africa's foreign policy will be a major a positive tool for the continent to thrive on the concept of multipolarism. It should be noted that in today's interconnected world, the importance of foreign policy cannot actually be underestimated, especially for developing regions like Africa. Historically, it should be noted, African nations have found themselves at the mercy of external influences, often school of thought hold that independent foreign policies can still counteract regional interest in Africa. It has been largely seen that embracing an independent foreign policy can help to empower African countries to break free from the chains of neocolonialism and thrive on the international stage or the world stage. So, but by adhering to the principles of multipolarism, I think African nations can leverage their collective strength or effort, forge strategic partnerships, and equally pursue their own tailored approaches to international relations. Thus, this edition of the program Global Insight explores the potentiality of independent foreign policy for Africa and how this can drive Africa's quest for prosperity. By formulating their own diplomatic strategies, African nations can actively engage with multilateral institutions and bringing in their tailored effort to address regional challenges, harness, of course, the benefits of globalization. How can Africa thrive under the multilateral natural systems in the era of multilateralism? Is Africa ready to leverage the advantages that come with this new philosophy, which ends the unipolar system of the world, largely actually dominated by the United States? Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for making our time. It is Global Insight, and together with a panel of experts, we're going to explore the advantages of multipolarism. We are going to look at how Africa's foreign policies can help the continent thrive on that is a new ideology, especially defining the continent's voice at the global level. I think it's time for us to acknowledge this panel of experts that will give insightful analysis on the topic for discussion Thursday. And let me take you now to the United States of America. We're being joined by ACHILLES, who is a banker and also an international financial expert. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Good morning to you, sir, and thanks for honoring today's invitation.
Good morning, Ms. WIYDORVEN. Thank you so much for the invitation again this weekend. The topic is very fascinating to me, and I believe it's going to be fascinating for the listeners as well, and I'm pleased to be part of the panel today. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you too, and it's a pleasure having you to share your insight on perspectives like this which concern the African continent. We're going to the East African nation of Kenya. We're going to join Alex OGUTU, who is a governance researcher. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome, of course, for the first time on the Pan-African television For You Media Africa.
Hello, hello, Clarissa, and hello, my co-panelist, Achille. I'm happy to be here. And just to echo what my co-panelist has said, this is indeed an interesting subject, an interesting topic. It could not have come at a better time, and we do look forward to our deliberations from it. Thank you very much, and appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
And we actually appreciate you giving priority to this rendezvous. Just to remind our viewers out there that we are streaming live on Facebook for You Media Africa English and for You Media Africa. You all welcome, and you can actually share your comments, what you think about this. Does Africa have a voice in the international arena? Do you think Africa is ready to leverage the opportunities that will come with the multipolar world? And of course, what is Africa's life after its collaboration with the global powers and even multilateral institutions, BRICS, and even individual nations which have defined their voices on the global stage? That is the question that we are going to be answering in the course of the program, and many others. Thank you again. Now we are going to dive straight away to the introductory phase of the program with Achilles EKEU, who is going to be presenting a detailed analysis, introductory analysis to our topic for discussion this day. You have the mic, Achilles EKEU.
Good morning, dear listeners. Good morning, Ms. WIYDORVEN, for the invitation again. For far too long, Africa has been subjected to external influences and power dynamics that have often undermined its sovereignty and independence. The legacy of colonialism coupled with ongoing neo-colonial tendencies has impeded the ability of African nations to chart their own course and pursue their collective interests on the global stage. However, the tide is turning. We are witnessing a resurgence of African agency, where nations are increasingly asserting their independent foreign policy stances and rejecting the notion of being mere pawn in the great power struggles. This newfound confidence and self-determination are essential for Africa to thrive in the face of complex global challenges ranging from climate change and resource scarcity to economic inequalities and political instability. Multilateralism in this context becomes a powerful tool for Africa to leverage its collective strength and amplify its voice on the international stage. By fostering regional integration, promoting intra-African trade, and forging strategic alliances, African nations can counterbalance the influence of external actors and therefore advance their shared interests more effectively. Moreover, an independent foreign policy enables African countries to navigate the intricate web of global power dynamics with greater autonomy and to forge partnerships that align with their national priorities and values. It empowers them to resist external pressures and to chart their own course, free from shackles of colonial tendencies or undue interference. However, it is crucial to recognize that the path to true independence and self-determination is not without its challenges. Overcoming entrenched dependencies, addressing internal divisions, and building robust institutions are crucial prerequisites for achieving sustainable progress. As we discuss this topic today, let us embrace the spirit of Pan-Africanism and solidarity, recognizing that our collective strength lies in our unity and shared aspirations. Together, we can forge a new narrative for Africa, one that celebrates our rich diversity, upholds our sovereignty, and propels us towards a future where we truly thrive as equal partners on the global stage. Thank you.
Which is a very imperative for Mr. EKEU. It's about Africa recognizing that it is time, it redefines its own voice at the global stage, with the advance and increased rate of globalization. It is about imperative for the continent Africa to put concerted effort that will help the continent thrive under you made mention the global dynamics which are taking place, and it's actually a challenge for Africa's institutional bloc, the African Union, that carries the agenda of the continent as a body to re-strategize and look at how to engage with the global path in the context of the multipolar world. Let's proceed to Kenya with Mr. Alexa, a governance researcher. Alexa, today we are looking at this very important topic, the Africa and multilateralism, and I will always reiterate the statement which was made years ago by the African Union Commission Chair in the person of Musa Faki Muhammad, who actually said that it is no news, and Africa and even institutions like the African Union and others are aware that multilateralism is increasing on the continent Africa. So it provides a platform for Africa to leverage on and define its voice at the international stage. But today we are looking at if adopting an independent foreign policy will be a major tool that Africa needs to thrive under this new concept of multipolarism. What is your own analysis or opinion pertaining this topic for discussion? This is a general perspective of it. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for having me on board. I'm super excited to make my debut in this show, and I do trust that we are going to have an informative session that will be to the benefit of our viewers, our listeners across the continent, and in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which I fully identify with. Now, to the question. So I guess the question we are asking is the place of Africa in a multilateral world, a multipolar world. So I guess we should start by asking, are we in a multipolar world? Certainly, yes. The indications are we are deep into the post-American world. If you look at the economics, in the global economics, that points to that. We look at 1960, then the United States controlled nearly 60% or 40% of the global GDP. That has since shrunk to about 25%. Look at China's contribution, on the other hand, that has risen from a paltry 2.5% 40 or so years ago in 1980 to close to 20% as we speak today. So indications are that we are in a multipolar world. The question, though, is Africa punching its weight within the global ecosystem? I think not. And again, statistics show it very eloquently and clearly. So as we speak, our GDP is a paltry 3% of the global GDP. And we're talking of a continent that houses about 18% of the global population with all its immense resources. So certainly we are not doing well. We need to do a lot more. Now, in the context of achieving this, I know we are going to speak more about this later, but my co-panelists already indicated some of the things that we need to do, including along the political, geostrategic, as well as economic front lines. But the key question of how we play our role within a multilateral system, a multipolar system, which we are clearly in, I think there are so many things that we can do. We have systems in place. Now, the question of an independent foreign policy, which you have rightly asked. So what does an independent foreign policy look like? What does that even mean in the first place? Now, How I see it, an independent foreign policy is really not a foreign policy that is detached, that is decoupled from the rest of the globe, but it is a foreign policy that captures the aspirations of Africa and ensures that the continent is rightly centered and exploits itself commensurably with what it commands by way of its resources, natural resources, geostrategic resources, diplomatic resources, and so on and so forth. So that is the kind of foreign policy that we need. I think there are ingredients, we are not there yet, but there are ingredients that really positions us, puts us in a pole position to exploit our potentials that are largely underexploited. Economically, you talk of structures like the African Free Continental Free Trade Area, that makes robust promises, and if well harnessed, if well exploited, would certainly push Africa's GDP from where we are today to the 6th largest economy globally. So I think we do have ingredients politically. We have an African Union that is increasing in its robustness, but I do think we still have a bit more work to do to ensure that we really don't fall victim to the machinations and maneuvers by these global interests. Because what I'd love to share with our viewers, is that generosity really is not a virtue that is embraced in the international system. It's fairly anarchic. Everybody fights for their survival, and Africa must rise to the occasion and fight for a rightful place in the world. And that, if you ask me, is very much possible. Thank you.
And of course, that is where the problematic lies, because in this world, it's all about interest, it's all about nations defining their national interests and engaging in or being part of multilateral institutions. It's first of all to advance the internal agenda of a country before looking at the agenda of the group as a whole. And that is why we are asking the question if Africa actually understands, or African stakeholders who are at the forefront, if they really understand the stakes of this multilateralism which is increasing on the continent, if they really understand the stakes of what it takes to redefine. You just mentioned some figures which actually prove to us that there is still a lot that the continent has to do, because if we are embracing multilateralism, opening the continent to several international partners for trade and whatsoever, it should be reflected on the gross domestic product of the continent as a whole. It should be reflected on the number of job opportunities which are available for the African vibrant youth. It should be actually reflecting the changes in terms of infrastructure development, and of course even life expectancy of the population. That is, if we have a good health structures to determine this. So now that's why today we want to look at the place of foreign policy coming from Africans. Being aware of what independent foreign policy is already, as you two have underlined in your opening statement. So the question we're asking now is because when we talk about this independent foreign policy in the context of international relations, we want to look at how the country can manage its sovereignty, and of course also make independent decisions which will promote the agenda of a nation and also promote the agenda of the global world. We want to look at how these foreign policies redefined can help economic transformation or advancement, and also look at the geopolitical aspect of it, if with the geopolitical competition and increase in multilateralism, if Africa can capitalize on this to define a strong global or international agenda. And I'm directing this question to you, Mr. Ike. How can Africa now shape global agenda through its independent foreign policy?
Well, in answering that question, I wanted to go back a little bit about how African foreign policy or multilateralism evolved over the few years, over the past few years since our independence. I think it will give a good idea of where we were and then where we are today, and help answer that question that you just asked. The evolution of Africa's approach to multilateralism has been a complex and dynamic journey. That journey has been shaped by the continent's historical experiences and its quest for self-determination and global relevance. In the Organization of African Union in 1963 was a pivotal moment, demonstrating the continent's commitment to unity. However, during the Cold War, in the Cold War era, Africa's multilateral efforts were often caught in the crosshairs of the ideological divide between the East and the West blocs. And so external powers sought to exert their influence, leading some African nations to align more closely with one side or the other, sometimes at the expense of true independent foreign policy. So the end of the Cold War ushered in a new era marked by a reinvigorated drive to African Renaissance and a renewed focus on economic development and regional integration. The transformation of OAU to African Union in 2002 was a testament to that shift, as the continent sought to forge a more robust and an effective multilateral framework to address its pressing challenges. Throughout this evolution, the pursuit of an independent foreign policy has played a crucial role in shaping Africa's approach to multilateralism. And so nations that have successfully asserted their sovereignty and chartered and independent courts have been better positioned to leverage multilateral platforms for their collective interest. We have witnessed nations like South Africa, Nigeria, and Ethiopia emerging as influential voices on the global stage, advocating for African interests and priorities within multilateral institutions. For example, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the G20. Their independent foreign policy stances have enabled them to navigate complex geopolitical dynamics and forge strategic alliances that align with their national and regional objectives. At the same time, Africa's engagement with emerging powers such as China, India, and Turkey, for example, has further diversified its multilateral partnerships, offering alternative avenues for cooperation and resource mobilization. This diversification reflects the continent's growing assertiveness and its determination to chart its own course rather than being beholden to traditional power structures. However, it's important to acknowledge the challenges that persist. Internal divisions, conflicts, and governance deficit within some African nations have sometimes undermined the continent's ability to present a unified front on the multilateral stage. So overcoming these obstacles and fostering greater regional integration and policy coherence remains a critical imperative for Africa to fully leverage the potential of multilateralism. So, in summary, I would say, Africa's approach to multilateralism has evolved from a post-colonial assertion of unity to a more nuanced and multifaceted engagement with global institutions and emerging powers. So the pursuit of independent foreign policy has been a driving force in this evolution, enabling African nations to assert their agency, advance their interests, and forge partnerships that align with their developmental aspirations.
it's about defining foreign policies that will align with internal developmental aspirations, like we mentioned already in our preamble about the fact that the foreign policies of most African nations were defined putting into consideration historical actually factors, and of course to note that many countries in Africa were colonized, and when they got independence they did not actually bring a new preamble that would define the changing times. So today we are in the 21st century, and that is asking if the existing approaches that African governments use in tackling or maybe in defining continental agendas, do they really fit in the present time? And that is a question we want to answer in the course of the program Global Insight on For You Media Africa. You've mentioned a lot of challenges, the challenges that the continent is facing, even on that is multilateral, multipolar system. Coming to you, Alex, you know, we are looking at an independent foreign policy having the capacity or the propensity to help the continent fight aspects like neo-colonialism, because that is something that the continent is fighting at this particular moment. How do you think we can practically leverage on this independent foreign policy to put an end to neo-colonialism in the African continent? Please, can you unmute your mic?
Sorry, apologies for that. So thank you very much for very much question about the role the independent foreign policy, Africa's independent foreign policy can play in ensuring that we free ourselves, we extricate ourselves from the stranglehold of foreign powers that are so keen on ensuring that we are exploited at our expense. So the question is, how can we leverage it? But before I answer that question, and I acknowledge what my co-panelist has said, that evolution, that explication of how the African foreign policy has evolved over time is quite detailed. At the risk of taking a few away from my co-panelists. Now, the question that I ask is, the rise of Africa, the recognition of Africa's potentialities globally, is it a function of Africa itself, or is it a function of external powers acknowledging the role of Africa and therefore seeking to exploit them from the front while we lead? Now, why I'm asking this question is because if you look at some of the things that have been happening over the recent past, look at Africa's inclusion in the G20. So that was merely more sort of an invitation by the same foreign powers, certainly acknowledging Africa's role in the global system by way of our immense resources. If you look at the continued trend and habit of the same foreign powers, both from the East as well as from the West, inviting African leaders, 55 of them in their respective countries, just to discuss, left wondering how effective that is in fronting Africa, or rather in having Africa seize the moment and leverage our resources to champion our cause. So there's certainly diversification of partnerships. In fact, some argue that we are in the Cold War 2.0, pitting West and the East, only that this time around the East, the opportunity of the East has been seized by China. So how well can we leverage this? Now, my argument is simple. If we talk of an independent foreign policy, so it has to be anchored. It has to have ingredients to ensure that it can stand on its own. So there would be diplomatic leverages, there would be economic leverages, there would be political leverages, there would be geostrategic leverages. Now, do we as Africa better equipped or well-resourced with these leverages to ensure that we develop a strong and independent, or rather we enhance a strong, independent foreign policy that can rightly posture Africa in the global ecosystem? Yes, I think we have. If you look at our diplomatic leverages, now look at the United Nations. We are one of the largest voting bloc, constituting about 28% of the United Nations voting bloc at the General Assembly, and that's huge if you ask me. So we do have the numbers to exercise our powers effectively, diplomatically, within this multilateral institution. And by the way, it should not be lost to us that we do have commensurate human potential, human resource too, to champion us through this course. So look at the current leadership of the World Trade Organization, the current leadership of World Health Organizations. Both are led by Africans, one from Nigeria and one from Ethiopia. Now, away from the diplomatic leverages, look at the geostrategic leverages. Do we have geostrategic leverages? Africa is geostrategically positioned. If you look at the trade routes that we command by way of our control of sections of the Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, and that vital sea in the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea, these speak to the geostrategic leverages that we have to ensure that we command our rightful share. How about economic leverages? Now, Africa has one of the largest populations, demographically speaking. So as we speak, we control about 18% of the global population and rising. It is estimated that in the next 26 or so years, our population, the proportion of our population will have risen from the current 18% to about 25%, and that is huge, even in terms of market. So we just mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Area, which, if fully harnessed, will really boost our economic value by way of addition to our GDP, by way of providing close to 30 million employment opportunities. So we do have economic leverages to ensure that we position ourselves well. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that we have blocks that we can use to enhance our foreign policy as Africa, a unified foreign policy that positions us in a way that the outside world cannot ignore us, and certainly it is to acknowledge that they are beginning to appreciate and acknowledge us, but more crucially, they cannot exploit us by way of taking advantage of our weaknesses here and there. Some of them have been alluded to by co-panelists. Issues to do with governance. We have issues to do with conflicts here and there. So these are some of the weaknesses we have to address, and that speaks to one of the things that we should do. In fact, we must do to ensure that our foreign policy stands strong. It postures us so well. We have to address these internal conflicts, these internal contradictions that we have, because the temptation, the appetite by the same outside world to try and cause divisions is not lost on us. Just a few weeks past, as the conflict in the DRC festers and worsens, the AU Commission Chairman Faki Mohammed did caution and warned the foreign powers to keep off the conflict, essentially meaning that they are still interested in destabilizing the continent if that would serve their interests. So we do have a role to strengthen it, because it is something that we can effectively leverage. Thank you.
Indeed, and being aware of the dynamics around the continent should even present stakeholders, especially political stakeholders, with enough to contextualize and make good use, like the AUC chair have always said. We are aware of the increased multilateralism. So what is Africa doing? What are our stakeholders doing to leverage on this for the benefit of the continent Africa. I remember with the advent of, when people signed and ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area, it was all joy across the African continent. But this day, you see, it is actually timid. It's true that some countries, Ghana, Rwanda, and other countries have started trading under the Continental Free Trade Area, but then the number of crises that the continent has recorded since that time till now, it becomes worrisome, and it joins now to maybe looking at the geopolitical stakes on the continent. The continent is becoming more and more attractive to foreign powers. We're looking at the crisis in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We see how the infringement of the U.S. in the ECOWAS made the bloc so vulnerable that it could not take independent decisions that will foster the integration and the interest or the agenda of the regional bloc. But we are aware of all of these obstacles or challenges faced as a continent, and being at the center of changing narratives, what is the way forward. So just to remind our viewers joining us that this is your program, insightful program, Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Do well to leave your comment on Facebook For You Media Africa English, and also on our YouTube page, as we are actually streaming live this particular topic. It's about promoting the African cause. It's about charting the way forward for Africa, and it's about critically analyzing if actually those at the fore are derailing constructive debate programs like this will help to advocate for change, and also contribute towards nation building in sharing insight and trying to change the narratives. It's not just about belonging to this particular organization. It's not just about trading with A and not B, but it's about you. What do you have on the table that will help to align with your internal developmental agenda? And this is the question I'm asking you, ACHILLES. We are looking at the place of the Africa's development agenda, the Agenda 2063, and in the line with multipolarism or multilateralism on the continent Africa. How can we, even especially the financial aspect of it, you being an expert, maybe curtail define these agendas under this new ideology that will fast track a clear economic trajectory for the continent Africa? We're talking about the continent insecurity, and we discovered that they use mostly young people in Africa to promote a radicalization. And I think if there is a vibrant economy, youth will be busy actually contributing to economic empowerment or growth, rather than taking arms and fighting each other. So what do you think can be done in line with the Development Agenda 2063 under the philosophy of multipolarity and with the multilateralism in Africa? Place your mic, Mr. Eke.
Thank you for the questions. I think African nations today can leverage multilateralism as a powerful tool to address common challenges such as poverty, conflicts, and climate change, and other economic issues, while simultaneously pursuing the independent foreign policy objectives. So by harnessing a collective strength, the collective strength of the continent, and fostering the regional cooperation African countries can definitely amplify their voices and exert greater influence on the global stage, which is what we lack today. We are all dispersed. My co-panelists mentioned all these meetings that we are having with, 55 countries or 54 countries meeting with one country. That stuff is like a joke for me. I don't know why. I don't know who thought about that that way of doing international business, especially when it comes to foreign policy. So I think there are some ways that we can achieve our own. We can achieve some success, leveraging that multilateralism. And so, first of all, I think collective action and burden sharing is one of the things that we can do, meaning that multilateral frameworks, can provide platforms for African nations to put their resources, and share best practices and coordinate collective action in tackling transnational challenges. Working together, we can distribute the burden and leverage economies of scale, making it more feasible to address issues like poverty alleviation, conflict resolution, and climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And we also have to think about agenda setting and norm shaping, which is, a way for us through multilateral institution for African nations to actively shape global norms and agenda in critical issues that directly impact the continent. So by presenting a united front that directly impacts, that can advocate, for our, the African nations' priorities, they can influence decision-making processes and also ensure that their concerns and perspectives are adequately reflected in international policies and agreements. And so we can also think of regional integration and policy harmonization, which gives us, stronger leverage, and reinforce, Africans' nation collective bargaining power, and then therefore enabling more effective implementation of our strategy or African nation shared strategy, because I know we lack a lot of that. Because we are very dispersed. We go to those meetings, and once we leave those meetings, what's the follow-up? What is there any strategy to follow through or to put together those decisions that have been adopted during those meetings? And so by aligning our African nations, by aligning the independent foreign policy within a regional framework, African nations can enhance their ability to address those common challenges. We can also, something that I've thought about is leveraging competitive advantages, right? So each African nation possesses, unique strength and resources and expertise that can be leveraged, through multilateral cooperation. So by capitalizing on these competitive advantages and fostering complementarity, African nations can optimize their collective efforts in various areas, such as peacekeeping, talk about climate resilience and sustaining development. So my colleague also mentioned diversifying partnership, which is exactly what we need to do. We can use multilateral platforms to diversify our partnerships and attract resources from a broader range of stakeholders that could include developed and emerging economies like BRICS, international organizations, and civil society's actors, right? So when we align all these, all these different views, we can leverage, these partnerships to mobilize financial and technical capacities to help us achieve our goals. So those are the few things that I think we can do to really have an impact. But if we are dispersed as we see today, we can do this for 50, 100 years. We're never going to meet our goals. And I think it's time for us to refocus and reconcentrate on African, African multilateral institutions or African Union or different regional institutions to really put together a strategy to be more effective on the global stage so we can have a voice that is impactful.
Indeed, it is imperative to be more useful and effective at the global stage and have a voice that will be impactful. And I think Africa can do that. We can take the case of South Africa that has been very intentional about seeing that there is justice as far as the conflict, the Palestinian conflict is concerned. And I think if actually there is this concerted effort, we will attain that milestone even in every sphere of it. I think Mr. Elijah ENOAKU just joined in at the moment. Time for us to welcome him to the program. Sir, we are talking about independent foreign policy to see if it's really that tool that African nations need to thrive under the context of multipolarity and with the increase of multilateralism in Africa. We would love to have your own perspective regarding the topic before we continue with the insightful analysis.
Sorry for coming in a little bit late. I kind of mix up the Cameroon time with my own time here in Canada. So my apology for that. I think to begin with, Clarissa and ladies and gentlemen, the platform, I think the first thing that Africa needs to do is to have the institutions that are going to guarantee or foster a unified foreign policy. Why do I say that? Because if you look at what's happening in Africa, that's telling you that there is no framework on which the African countries can work on a unilateral basis. Because if you look at the foreign policy of the African countries, they are as diversified as the countries themselves. South Africa is taking Israel to International Criminal Court. Kenya is against South Africa for doing that. Burundi is also having its own policy. Congo Kinshasa is out for Israel, to support Israel. They are even wanting to send troops over there. Cameroon is there with Russia. So if you name any African country, for example, and you name one foreign policy, you can count as many diversified versions as they are in Africa. Why is that? It's because we do not have a common framework on which to act together. There is no institutionalized framework where we can say, based on the African Union policy, this is the position of the African Union. Conflict in Ukraine, conflict in Israel, conflict here, conflict here. I'm just giving that one an example. I'm not saying that the framework is going to be on conflict. I'm just giving an example of how diversified the African continent is when it comes to acting on a particular issue, whether it is global or within Africa. Now, you even want to talk about things that are happening in Africa. It will surprise, it will shock a lot of people to know that we do not have even a framework to act on issues that are happening in Africa. Let's take it for example. The worst conflict on the globe right now is the conflict in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and is the most neglected. But what is the policy of African Union on that conflict? You see that South Africa is doing something different. Cameroon doesn't have a position. Congo has a different position. Rwanda is a party in that conflict. You see, there is completely no institution and no framework on which African countries should act. Because if you take, for example, what's happening in the European Union, whether you're talking about the position in Israel, the issue of Israel, whether you talk about the issue of Africa, whether you talk about the issue of Ukraine, that bloc is acting as one because they have a framework that all of them have signed onto and say, if there is going to be an issue, this is what our framework is to, they have an institutional framework that guides on how every country should respond. And you cannot diverse. You might have your own personal country interest, but the interest of the European Union comes first. As long as you go against that, you sign onto it. So what is going to guide the African Union, for example? We've talked about Agenda 2063. That is the beginning of a framework that can help the African Union come to some sort of an institution, very close to an institution, because in there we have a financial framework, we have technology, we have conflict, we have education, we have energy, we have anything. If you look at the pillars of that Agenda 2063, that is something that can give the African Union a framework for them to act on. But as we speak, when was that institutionalized? A couple of years ago. But there is no single one of them that has been ratified. I mean ratified in the sense that they are acting on it. If you look at it's a paper tiger kind of argument. They are not acting on it. There's nothing on the ground that shows that they are moving towards a common framework, institutionalized, agreed upon by everybody, so that they can act on that agenda. So I think that's where I'm just laying the basis and the foundation of where the problem is. Then, in terms of how to act, of course, when you now have a framework like that, every country, like, I came in halfway where my colleague was mentioning a couple of frameworks of which they can act, commodity framework, conflict resolution, education. Every country can now strategize and reframe their own personal interest based on that. I think that's where Africa needs to go. Because as we speak, I'm telling you, every country has its own, whatever they are doing, based on their own interest, and they're acting in haphazard manner. So I think that's the foundation for the problem.
Let me stay with you, Laja ENOAKU, listening critically to your analysis. Of course, you've identified that, they always say that diversity actually is good, but then sometimes diversity has its own limitations, and you've just underlined that the fragmented nature of the continent in Africa is already a setback if Africa has to thrive in the global arena, if Africa has to move along with the ideology of a multipolar world. And of course, we are looking at how these setbacks can actually be addressed. You quite mentioned the African Union. The media has a way of setting an agenda, and I think with the plurality of media, in especially African media, like For You media, it's already a milestone to address these challenges that the continent is facing at home. So now we know that the African Union is that one institution that defines the agenda of the continent as a whole. How can we make it more of a practical body that will have a strong voice in reacting to global issues and even internal issues concerning the African continent, that will make the continent leverage the advantages of globalization?
Okay. I always like to be practical when I speak, Clarice, because that will elucidate and give concrete solutions as to what we are discussing. Because number one, if you look at some of the policies of the African Union, there are a couple of some that we can pick and say, if they do ABC like this, that is going to be a way forward. Now, we have one of the strategy of Agenda 2063, if I remember very correctly, that has been spoken about by a couple of African presidents, is the commodity strategy. Paul Kagame, for example, and Yoweri Museveni. If I remember, I think the third person that talked about it was William Ruto. They came up with a commodity strategy, and they said every African country should sign into it. What is that commodity strategy? They said before a single raw product leaves the continent of Africa, that product must be transformed into semi-finished product, or at least finished product, before it leaves the continent of Africa. And they wanted every African country to sign. How many have signed as we speak today? Because this is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. It's as simple as ABC. It takes political will. Even though we talked about diversity, but there's unity in diversity. It takes the political will of African leaders to relinquish to their greed, relinquish to their, how do I want to call it? Foreign influence, because I'm going to come back to that foreign influence, because it's happening. We do not understand this. It's happening. It takes political will to relinquish that, because if you have a Cameroon, where you are, for example, sign and ratify and say, before cocoa leaves Cameroon, it must have been semi-finished into pulverized or powder, or at least, or even finished into chocolate. Do you understand just the economic impact of that single decision? Take only one. I don't want to go to all the other minerals, because Africa is the golden continent when it comes to minerals. We are talking about one common one. Cocoa. Cameroon produces it. I think Ghana produces it. I think Ivory Coast produces it. And a lot of countries in West Africa. If they sign and ratify and say, no cocoa is leaving our continent without it being finished. Take another one, as simple as ABC. Timber. Cameroon produces it. Congo produces it. Gabon produces it. A few countries that produce, they say, before timber leaves Cameroon, it must have been finished into semi-finished product, which is pulp. Even if you don't finish it, pulp, before it is sent to Europe. Just the economic impact of those two products. What it is going to do to the economy of those nations is astronomical. So this is not rocket science. It's something that everybody knows. But it takes the political will of the powers that be to stand up. When I say stand up to Western oligarchs that will come in to manipulate, because they manipulate us to think that we cannot produce this thing. We cannot go past that stage. So that is what it takes. As simple as that. It's not rocket science or engineering or something that we have to go. It takes the political will. It takes the greed of a leader that has the power to say, enough is enough. We cannot do this. And it's doable. Magufuli did it within a space of 6 years before he died. Kagame is doing it. Some other countries are doing it. I think Ruto is already implementing a couple of those things. So if African countries can come together and ratify some of these one by one, I'm telling you, even with the media, like for you media, that we are exposing some of these things, as time is going on, Africa will have a common foreign policy, whether it comes to product, it comes to conflict, it comes to education, it comes to technology. Not only that, if you look at the regional blocks, I think my colleague touched about it as we're signing it. Look at the regional blocks within Africa. We are talking about regional blocks that you have, sometimes you have just about 6 of them, like CIMAC. How many countries are within the CIMAC region? You have Cameroon, Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Chad, which other one? I think there are about 6 or 7. Those countries cannot even agree on a single common policy. Regional blocks. And they have common economies, common language, which is French. There's no difficulty in translating from English to French or Portuguese or this and that. They have a common platform, which is the language. They have a common history. They have a common, colonial master. Let me put it that way. Even though that's the elephant in the room, we don't want to call. They have a common colonial master. So they inherited a lot of commonality. But these countries cannot even agree. As we speak, the stock exchange market that Semak talked about some time ago, there is a fight between Gabon and Cameroon on where to install that common exchange market. As we speak, does the stock exchange market happen in Semak? No. because of infighting among them. They do not have a platform. They don't even know where to install it. They don't even know what it means. So these are the things I'm talking about. Even within regional blocks, you have disintegration among them. They do not understand. They can't even come to an agreement on what is our policy. Talk about foreign policy and conflict. Gabon just had a coup d'etat that was replaced by a military junta. You heard nothing from Semat. Nothing. No. They wrote some common, communiques. No, we don't want coup d'etats or whatnot. But that was it. Because of greed, those powers themselves are afraid of their own position. So that is where the problem is, Clarice. As long as we do not have this common platform and there's no political will, we'll be discussing this. But it's a good thing that we are discussing on the media. The media has a very good role to play. They are listening to us. I had calls and discussion with some people that listened to some of this interview and say, oh, this was nice, this was this. But hopefully they can implement some of the things that they are hearing from us. So it is doable. Africa can do this, and we can move forward and become a global competitor on the global stage. Not just Africa taking Israel to international court, and this one is doing so. No, acting together, have a common agenda and a common policy, because unity is strength.
Indeed, unity is strength, and I think Africa is going to reach there, and the media is going to help. The media has a role to play as far as bringing about development and also bringing about this integration in the global world. But the African media will do that magic, and things will change in Africa. We want to look at how the agenda that has been set in the years of colonialism and the agenda that has been set in the year of a unipolar world coming from the mainstream media. That is why, with the advent of African media, we want to prioritize charting the African cause, bringing the African perspective by Africans to Africans to reignite that spirit of change that will define the new Africa, free from the policies set by their colonial masters that to data still a problem as far as countries wanting to work together in line with attaining the objectives of the nation. Let me continue with you, Mr. Lex. Listening critically to Elijah ENOAKU, we see a problem, and when we keep talking about the problem, we advocate solutions. So now we've noticed that Africa is fragmented. Africa is making efforts to stand the competition at the global level, but internally there are still some unresolved problems that can make the continent not to thrive at the global stage. But there is one thing for sure: the world is evolving, philosophies are changing, globalization is a showcase, and it is there. International relations or corporations is taking another dimension, and we are talking about multipolarism, we are talking about multipolarity. We are looking at Africa joining a multilateral institution. The last time it was the AU being admitted as the permanent member of the group of 20 group, and of course we're looking at a whole lot of countries in Africa joining the BRICS. Recently in Nigeria actually made public the intention to join this organization, but the underlying factor or point is how ready are we to capitalize on these available institutions for our own good, to ensure that industrialization drive that the African Development 2063 actually articulates will be feasible maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, or maybe in the next 2 years, if we collaborate well with the international partners. So the question now is, how can we solve these problems affecting the continent strategically that will present a better scope or a greater scope for Africa at the international arena?
So thank you very much, and happy and excited to see my colleague, my fellow African, ENOAKU from Canada, and seeing his passion. Truly, that speaks to the kind of the drive that we need to propel our continent. I just hope that Africa will improve itself so that in future our brother doesn't have to join from Canada, where he confuses a bit of time zones, so he joins from home. I think that would be the ultimate joy. But now, coming back to the question, now, even before I address that question, let me put a few comments to what my brother from Canada has pointed. So I will take a slightly divergent opinion from his explanation. So just to be fair, I think Africa has frameworks that should guide how we manage our affairs continentally. I think that much we have achieved by way of the African Union itself, by way of the regional economic blocs, be it ECOWAS in West Africa, we've talked about CIMAC in Central Africa, we have East African Community in this side of the world, as well as SADC in the southern part of Africa. So we do have these frameworks, they exist, and they hold immense potential. But I do agree with you that what lacks is the commitment to follow through on some of the things that we eloquently articulate in these frameworks. And may I add hypocrisy. Now, why hypocrisy? I'll make reference to the very leaders that you've singled out as having made some propositions that would be good in propelling our continent ahead. You begin with my own president here in Kenya, William Ruto. You have singled him out as somebody who made that brilliant, and I concede that's a very brilliant suggestion, which he followed through, will ensure that the value addition that we yearn for to be done here in Africa would be done accordingly. But if you look at Kenya as we speak, we do have the African Continental Free Trade Area, an outgrowth of the African Union, to ensure that to have our economic pillar strengthened. Kenya, as we speak, signed recently, not so long ago, an economic partnership agreement with the European Union and the United Kingdom. You know what? Concerns have been raised about the conflicting provisions between the economic partnership agreement and the African Continental Free Trade Area, as well as the East African Community Customs Union. So they are conflicting. There are some goods that we suggest to import from Europe at a subsidized arrangement, yet that conflicts with the customs union of the East African Community. Now, aside from that, Kenya is in the process of negotiating a bilateral trade arrangement with the United States. It's called the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. So last year, late last year, if I remember correctly, the East African Court of Justice ruled that the whole Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership goes against the East African Community, and more specifically the Customs Union and the Common Market protocols of the East African Community. So, but you know what? We are insisting on proceeding with it. In fact, as late as January, we had a delegation from the US that was here in the country to negotiate that. So this essentially talk of Rwanda's Paul Kagame. He been singled out as well, and I think he has made some demonstrable sorts of examples on how to push through the Pan-African spirit. But the conflict in the eastern part of DRC cannot be completely explained without making a case for the role of Rwanda in that conflict. Now, these are the sort of hypocrisies that we are talking about. So if we are to address honestly and forthrightly the challenges that we face, commitment and neutralization of hypocrisy must be the key ingredients, and most particularly commitment. We have these blueprints, be it the African Union and the Agenda 2063. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area, a very brilliant argument, which, by the way, courtesy of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we now have the second largest free trade area in the world. So what we need is commitment to follow through the provisions of this, so we stop this hypocrisy. as well as these contradictory positions. So outwardly we project how Pan-Africanist we are, but inwardly we retreat and do the exact opposite of the very provisions that we publicly and commit to during daytime. So this, I think, is the one thing that must be addressed. Now, back to the question that you asked. How can we leverage? And I think part of my explanation speaks to the very thing that you talked about. Now, Africa's foreign policy certainly would speak to strengthening our own structures, and we've talked elaborately about them. I don't think there's need to repeat this, but also taking advantage of extra-African institutions, and we've talked of a number of them. We've talked of the United Nations. We have explained the immense potential that the United Nations hold and what Africa can do. At the beginning, I talked about Africa controlling close to 30%, precisely 28% of the voting bloc. This is something that we can take advantage of to ensure that our weight is heard at the United Nations. I know there's this consistent push to ensure that Africa alongside other countries secure a place at the United Nations Security Council. Currently, I think we have 3 slots for the non-permanent members, and I think that is not enough. The veto-wielding powers literally control the United Nations system. That's exactly why we are unable to make any move, any progress in the Middle East conflict. In the Middle East, we are unable to make any progress in the conflict in Ukraine. But what disappoints me is that we mostly speak about the conflicts in Europe, in the Middle East, but we forget our own conflicts here in Africa. So Sudan is such a conflict. So it was, and I was actually excited that yesterday the United Nations Security Council did pass a resolution calling on the warring parties in Sudan to cease hostilities ahead of the Ramadan. But that's not enough. We need to do more. What disappoints is that the United Nations is speaking a bit more loudly about on this than the African Union. Where is the African Union in the conflict in Sudan? These are some of the questions that we need to ask critical. Do you know that France is planning to hold a conference next month, April, about the peace and mobilization for support in Sudan? Why would that be held in France led by France? Yet we have Africa and Africa. So these are some of the things that we need to address. And as I conclude, I would just say that we have the right ingredients, we have the right institutions to ensure that we punch above our weight. It at the African level, it at the global level, we have all the ingredients. What we lack, and that which we must ensure that we institute, is commitment. Otherwise, the systems exist. We don't need to reinvent a wheel where one exists already. We just need to better and strengthen those that we have in place and which have immense potential insofar as securing our place in the world is concerned. So we have everything. Commitment and hypocrisy are the things that are really degrading our capacity to exploit them maximally.
Paris, if you permit me to just, this is a good discussion with my brother from Kenya. If you permit me, let's have this discussion.
Mr. Eke, I'm sorry if I have to sideline you at this moment. Let's just conclude with this point, and then we.
That's fine.
Come back
That's
to
fine. It was fascinating discussion, so that's what it is.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Mr. Ledger, you can continue, yeah?
Good. If you permit me, my colleague from Kenya has brought an excellent point. And I think when we discuss like this, if time permits us to deviate a little bit and discuss critical issues, it's still to the benefit of Africa. He has highlighted Kenyan agreement with the United States and these other countries. Very, very important. I follow that, my colleague. It's part of the research that I do. But you ask yourself, why did Kenya go ahead to sign those agreements at the detriment of SADC? I'll explain to you. And it boils to the point that you mentioned. I'm just trying to buttress your point and to give some other points. Kenya, for example, came out and said African countries should liberalize the economy. And they stood and gave an example and go in with action. Kenya is one of the 2 or 3 countries that has given Africans free passport, free entrance to the country. That's implementation of one of the goals of the agenda of 2063 by the African Union. How many countries in Africa did that? Now, what this is going to happen is this, because when it comes to trade, you have to balance the trade. When you allow free movement of people all over Africa, there's a benefit and a disadvantage to Kenya. Kenya has to look for a way to balance it in one way or the other. Why? Because if you allow inflow of goods and people into your country, and other countries continue to put trade restrictions, quotas, internment to their own products and their own people, it will be to the disadvantage of Kenya alone that has gone ahead to open its borders, open its economies to people coming. So I am not going to blame Ruto on that. Where the problem is SADC. Because if SADC has gone ahead to implement its own policies, I agree with you that the framework is there, but a constitution that is not being respected is as good as the non-existence of that constitution, my brother. That's why I said from the beginning that a framework, a concrete framework that has been signed and ratified and implemented with sanctions. With sanctions. Because as long as you have a framework and you do not put checks and balances in place for defaulters, people will default and go their way. Look at SADC and all other East African regional blocs. For example, you mentioned the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a conflict that I've studied for years. When I mentioned Kagame, I mentioned Kagame from an economic perspective. If I want to mention Kagame from a conflict perspective, that's a different agenda. This is a gentleman that we all know is sponsoring terror in the Eastern Republic of Congo with the existence of M23. How has that regional bloc brought that guy to the table? How? What are the sanctions that have been meted on him? What policies have been meted on him? We know very well that Uganda of Yoweri Museveni is supporting him with existence because they want to fight the Lord's resistance army that is in that region. They're supporting him to bring chaos in Congo. And these are people within the same regional bloc. What has been done to put these people in check and balances? So if you have a framework and a constitution that exists and it's not being implemented, it's as good as non-existence of that constitution. That's why I said, yes, those frameworks are there, but they are toothless bulldogs. They don't do anything. Nobody seems to implement anything. Clarice, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
No, just if you've concluded with what you were saying, as you were talking, I think Mr. EKEU will answer this question. When we're talking foreign policy here, we also look at how Africa's foreign policy within Africa, not only a foreign policy that will thrive at the international stage, because as Africa it is right now, 55 countries, nations have their policies that will actually help them tread very well with other neighboring countries in Africa. So now we see that even in Africa or within Africa, the foreign policy is still a problem. How can we solve these to ensure a practical, independent policy that will now thrive in Africa and beyond? Beyond is at the international stage. We cannot actually change the happenings around the global world. Globalization, it's actually a reality. And I mentioned it already at some point, and we cannot also maybe neglect international cooperation. But now we see that even the foreign policies that countries have within Africa is still a problem in the maybe the unification of the continent Africa. So how can we tactically handle this very fragile situation for the betterment of the continent?
Is that, oh, that's me? Thank you. Well, I think the root cause of all these issues that we have, structural issues that's come from the way our countries were created, right? The way we had our independence, all these structure, power structure that were put in place by colonial powers before they left. We're still feeling, we're still reeling from that, and I think I say until we have Pan-African leaders, real Pan-African leaders in charge of our countries, it's going to be hard for us to be united or to have to make very good decisions for our own interests. When you look at all these organizations, United Nations, African Union, ECOWAS, CEMAC, they're all funded by who? They are all funded by Europeans or Americans. So, and we know that who funds, it owns. If you fund something, then you own it. So either it's Chinese or Russian or whoever is funding is going to dictate, how you're going to use, their funds. And so we really have, a big issue there that is going to be difficult for us to solve until we have determined leaders. And when I talk about those determined leaders, I'm looking at, those three countries that separated from ECOWAS, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And they stated that they don't agree anymore with the views and the practices of ECOWAS. Those sanctions that ECOWAS, put on those countries, they are nowhere. There's no provision in those organizations' statutes. There are no provisions to sanction anyone because it's an economic environment. It's an economic entity, and there is no political aspiration, or there is no political decision that should be made within those economic entities. So what happened is France went ahead and used that to hurt those countries, because the leaders, even though they're military leaders, the founders of ECOWAS were military leaders, all of them. So and we know that France, for example, France became independent, thanks to who? De Gaulle, who's the military leader, right? So they're all coming today and telling us that military leaders cannot be accepted. It's a no, it's a no, it's a red flag, it's a red line. I think it's just bias. And so when I look at it, those three countries of the Sahel, they're working together. They just put together a unified army. At least a unified military to fight those terrorists. And they're putting they're going to come up very soon with their own currency, right? So and so we see how they are going fast. They are very effective in the way they're taking actions, And so this is what we need. Those big blocks with all these different superpowers that are controlling us, United States, Europe, France, everybody, it's hard to have a common strategy, to have a common framework, and be serious about implementing them, because they are conflicting interests, right? So those leaders, they came to power thanks to those some of these superpowers, right? So they have to cater to the interests of the people who put them in charge, and at the same time try to appease their own population. And so there is a conflict. So that's why we hear these. We see all these conflicting decisions, right? We mentioned, Kenya taking, a decision, and then that goes into in direct conflict with SADC region. We see all these, so nothing is going the way we want, even though we have, frameworks in place. That's because of the fact that we don't have, strong leaders. And I think until we get to that point, where we have very strong Pan-African leaders who are not scared, who are not afraid of, saying what they think or what they feel and doing it, not just saying it, but implementing it, like we see what's going on in Sahel areas today, in the Sahel area today. We're not going to get there. And that's going to be something that's going to take time, maybe, but we need to, and I've seen some people talking about, creating some type of organization where they can advocate for Pan-African leaders to postulate for elections and things like that. It's great. This is the way to go, because we need people who are, when we listen to the president of, he just passed away, of what is that country? Forgot the name. I'm sorry. He's the one who told the German minister that came to his office, I think it's Namibia, right? Remember Namibia? Right. So the one of the German minister from Germany came to Namibia and started telling the president that they're concerned about the fact that there are so many Chinese companies in this country, and the president turned around and said, hey, what's your concern about it? This is not your country, this is our country, right? So it was amazing. And when we see leadership, like the one in South Africa, even though the conflict in Israel and Palestine is very foreign, very far away from South Africa, they're still taking a stance, and that's to show to the U.S. and to the whole world that even though we are not directly impacted by that conflict, those are human beings that we're treating like dogs, like animals. And that is unacceptable. And they are the ones who are going around telling African countries we have to have democracy, human rights, all that stuff that they talk about every day, but when that happens, and that doesn't serve their interests, they shut up. They just support it. They pretend that they don't see anything. It's that hypocrisy that my fellow panelist was talking about. It's going to be difficult because hypocrisy combined with corruption, combined with the fact that those presidents cater to different superpowers who put them in charge. You see, that's a recipe for disaster. And as long as this happens, we're not going to have that freedom, that independent voice, independent institutions that we're looking for. And so we are going to be facing tough times ahead. So that's the way I think we should be able to solve these issues. We have to have in charge leaders that are really committed to the African, Pan-African issues, and that are really committed. Otherwise, we're still going to face these issues in the next few years.
Of course, the Namibian president you were referring to is later Hage Ngoma.
That's right. That's right.
He's actually the one, and that statement you made, it's bringing me to another question, which I actually wanted us to analyze in the course of the program. You quite remember you said about the German official coming and asking the Namibian leadership why there's the presence of the Chinese officials in the country. And lately, during the World Youth Forum in the Russian city of Sochi, there was a Togolese, I beg your pardon, member of parliament who, while talking to the media and commenting on the philosophy of multipolarity and other aspects, said that countries do not need to come and dictate to them, like, you don't have to trade with Russia. If you do, we are going to levy sanctions on you. And he was so concerned and particular about, like, why would you want to trade with me on the basis that I have to shun my partnership with another partner? And that is where we are talking about the aspect of independent foreign policy. I think India is some sort of a country that actually adopts this policy of non-alignment, and it's actually having a diverse partners. So it's actually a problem that we need to analyze or address as far as Africa is concerned. Coming to you, Alex, with this question, what do you think, and does it have to do maybe with adopting a new mindset towards addressing these crazy, I'll call it crazy instances where country A will categorically tell another country that I will not trade with you, or I will levy economic sanctions on you if you maintain a partnership with country B? How feasible is that, and how can we, an African voice, say no to that if it has to thrive under this philosophy of multipolarity?
Thank you very much for that question. It's a critical question, but just to briefly request, I'll request to pursue a bit of this conversation with my comrade from Canada. I would have loved to respond to a few things, but I think we can pursue it.
We don't have much time. Again, we have less than 20 minutes to be together.
Yes, yes. Now, to address your question, now, the extent to which another power can dictate to you on who you trade with or don't trade with speaks to the very problem that we are talking about, vulnerability. Now, if you build your systems strongly and you weave a narrative of your own and build it very, very strongly to the extent that it becomes impregnable, nobody will dictate to you who you trade with or don't trade with. Now, the extent to which we are
You are muted, sir. Please, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Apologies for that.
Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
It's to the extent to which we are weak as a continent, and therefore we are just pushed around. Why is it that even with the sanctions that, say, the United States purports to impose against China, China still thrives? I mean, these are the questions that we need to ask. So a continent that whose proportion of the global GDP is 3%. You would be dictated around. Now, imagine this: we contribute a paltry 3% to the global GDP, yet we have 18% of the population. We control 18% of the global population. So demographically, we are quite superior. Now, in terms of resources, Africa, according to estimates, controls close to or about 30% of the minerals that power the world today. Come to think of that. Natural resources, beyond just minerals, we have the second largest tropical rainforest in the world. So the one that is in DRC is only second to the Amazon rainforest. We have some of the largest rivers in the world, top of River Congo, River Nile, the longest in the world. So these are resources that we have at our disposal that speaks to our potentialities. Now, the extent to which we are unable and deliberately to exploit them and make sure that we make our mark in the global stage speaks on who is to blame. So what we need to do, in my opinion, is to build our systems, be it politically, be it economically, be it socially, so strong that they become too impregnable. For emphasis, they become impregnable to the Western or Eastern powers to sort of want to frustrate or sabotage us. So really, we have the ingredients. What we need is just to implement them. So the response to your question is very simple. Just make Africa as strong as it can be, then it would not be vulnerable to this kind of manipulations. Look at India, for instance. India has adopted a non-aligned stance. India has if you want a country that has an independent foreign policy, India has one. The United States tries to reach out to them insofar as the question of Russia is concerned. They insist on trading with Russia despite the misgivings of the United States.
Sure.
So this is the kind of the thing that in fact, we have a lesson to learn from India insofar as building our robust foreign policy is concerned. Now, what we must do is to deal with these internal contradictions, and we've spoken about them. This is one way of ensuring that we have a strong, we develop ourselves so strongly, we have a strong posture that nobody can manipulate anyhow. And just to conclude, the key question is this a century for Africa? Is this have we arrived? Yes and no. Sorry, allow me for creating my own question and proceeding to answer it. Have we arrived at the global stage? Yes and no. Yes, because the outside powers, these foreign powers that we talk about, have recognized our potential, which is why they keep inviting us, hopping from one country to the other, to discuss so-called partnership arrangements. So, you're left wondering, why can't they come So we discuss them here in Africa. We have a big building in Addis Ababa, the African Union headquarters. So big it can accommodate European leaders, can accommodate Asian leaders. Why do we have to ferry 55 African leaders to these countries to discuss this so-called? So the very fact that these outside countries are inviting us, it is in clear recognition that we have the potential, we have what is needed to position Africa strategically. So away from this, the invitation to these other global platforms, talk of the G20, talk of BRICS, and by the way, the recent expansion of BRICS has increased Africa's membership from 1 to now 3. So I think out of the 7 expanded membership, Africa controls about 30%. We have South Africa, we have Ethiopia, we have Egypt. So the very fact that these players are reaching out to us to invite us to their platforms communicates to the very fact that Africa has arrived insofar as them recognizing our potential is concerned. No, because I say that my response is yes and no. No, because we are ourselves unable to use these resources to position ourselves strategically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Of course, we are almost culminating. One word, Mr.
Yes.
Ike? Just
very shortly.
Before I finish with Mr.
Yes.
Elijah.
No, I think what Mr. Alex is saying, we all agree on that. It's the issue is how do we do that? All right, so how do we make sure that happens? You know, all these frameworks, all these, you know, good intentions, they're great. You know, we know what to do, but the fact that the reality is that we are not in a position of really doing what we want because we have competing interests and we are being pulled in different directions because of these competing interests. So my view is that we cannot be strong. We can only be strong until we talk about, you know, African defense, strong African defense.
Sure.
You know, if we look at the European Union, if you look at America, you look at, you know, Asia, those countries can do what they want because they have a leverage. They have, you know, a strong defense, you know, that allows them, you know, to be able to do some things independently, regardless of who is pressuring them. Because, you know, until we get to that point, we are very weak. And, as you know, if we are still weak, whoever comes to power, who tries to implement something, the next person who comes is going to destroy it. Because, you know, pressure, he's fearing that he could be, you know, kicked out of power by some military coup or so. So I think, you know, in all this conversation, no one has talked about, you know, a strong African defense system or policy or framework that will protect African countries, no matter how big they are or small they are. So that gives us the leverage to be able to say no to Europeans, no to those free trades, you know, crazy, stupid free trade agreement that we sign, and that penalizes our economies. No to the U.S., you know, and so we have to get to that point, and that is one area where I have not heard any institution talk about in Africa, which is strong, our military, you know, strategy for the whole continent. We haven't talked about that.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. So I know in subsequent edition we're going to take holistically on how to build a strong military for the continent Africa. We are ending this session with you, Elijah ENOAKU, of course, looking at the recommendations for an independent African policy that will make the continent thrive at every stage.
Clarice, yeah, let me agree and disagree with my colleagues about military and all this. Here is the problem in Africa. The mindset. It is not the gun. It is the mindset. That is what is lacking. And I always give you examples so that we see example. Magufuli did not build an army. He ruled for 6 years. That man did not go in for a big army. What he did, he is a man with the mindset and the power and the ability and the fortitude that withstood the European imperialist. When he came to power, he renegotiated all the contracts, and he said, either you renegotiate the contracts or you go. They were bound because they knew what they were going to lose to come and renegotiate that power. We have a military leader in Gabon who came to power. Gabon is a small country. That country owed the IMF close to, I can't remember how many billions. It took that man 4 months to pay back all the loans from the IMF. When he paid back all the loans of the IMF, he said this: as long as the IMF continues to give African loans on a 20 to 15% interest and give the same loans to the European Union at 0.5% interest, they are not going to the IMF for any loan.
Okay,
just the Sahel region,
time.
The fastest growing country in the world. Go and do your research and check. The fastest growing country in the world today is Niger.
That's true.
It took over power, a military leader. How long did it take them for that country to become the fastest growing country in the world? So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what is lacking in Africa. The mindset. If we have leaders with the mindset and the fortitude to change things in Africa, it will change. Look at the Sahel region. For example, those 3 countries, my colleague talked about them forming a union. But it would surprise you to know that ECOWAS, as they call it in French, CDA or whatever they call, has been struggling to come with a monetary policy. The old fox, which is Ivory Coast, being used by France over and over. When they came over and they said they want to create the ECO, France manipulated the Ivory Coast and they destroyed that policy. But today, as we speak, 3 countries, military leaders, have come together. They are not only forming military alliance, they are forming economic alliance, they are forming a monetary policy, they are forming a strategic policy. They are coming together to fight terrorism, and they are defeating what France, with its mighty power, said they were coming to defeat in Africa. African countries are able to do it by themselves. As we speak today, Kigali, that was one of the strongholds of the terrorists, has been taken over by the military leader in that country, something that France and the rest of the country could not do. It is the mindset, ladies and gentlemen. If we have leaders with the fortitude and the mindset, Africa will change. Africa will change. I know time is going fast, Clarice, but I think we should come back to this discussion and really pinpoint the issues that are facing Africa and why we are where we are today. It's true we need, I'm not completely discarding my colleague. We need
of course, we'll come back. We will come back to.
Okay, let me just land, Clarice. Let me just land.
Of course, because there's another program that needs to go live. So
let me just land. I'm not discarding completely the ideas of my colleague, but I'm saying the military aspect of it should come last. It should not be our agenda, because if you have any country that has more than 30% of its budget being dedicated to the military, that country cannot develop. It's very difficult. So that's something we need to take in consideration. So thank you so much.
Of course, our next discussion will be focused on this, and I want to take this opportunity to say thank you, gentlemen, for the great insight regarding this topic for discussion this day, and we continue to advocate the African cause. For you, media is there to ensure that we set the African agenda using the African media that will bring about this practical change that we need. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for trusting your #1 Pan-African television, and do have a lovely moment in the company of our transmissions, and see you some other time. Bye-bye to you all.